The Spinoff Podcast Network. Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
The Fold is brought to you by O-Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa.
Kia ora koutou, welcome to The Fold. This isn't the voice you're expecting to hear, I'm sure, but let me explain. My name is Jane Yee. I'm head of podcasts at The Spinoff, and I'm a longtime friend of Duncan Greive's. And the reason I'm doing Duncan's job on today's episode is because as series producer of The Fold, I really couldn't let the announcement of his resignation as CEO of The Spinoff go without bringing him in as a guest on the country's favourite media podcast. But of course, the problem is, while Duncan can absolutely smash out a monologue, we thought self-interviewing might be a wee step too far. So here I am as a weird sort of proxy for host Duncan, so he can be guest Duncan. I've known Duncan since we met through mutual university friends in the late 90s, which seems like a very long time ago, probably because it was. And we immediately hit it off. Over the years, we've not only been friends, but we've also worked as contemporaries in the local music industry. Our work together started properly when he first launched The Spinoff, a little TV blog that Lightbox took a punt on and was run more or less on the smell of an oily rag, wholly by Duncan Greive and Alex Casey to begin with. At the time, I was and still am completely obsessed with reality TV, and I begged him to let us do a recap podcast of the country's first ever season of The Bachelor together. And The Real Pod, our reality TV and pop culture podcast, was born and has been battling on now for 8 years. In that time, that podcast hasn't changed much, but The Spinoff has morphed from that wee telly blog into one of the country's largest and most respected independent media companies, and all under the direction of Duncan Greive. I'm biased. I just put that out there right now, but Duncan is a force. He's someone who dreams really big. He wants to press the button on things yesterday. He's forever innovating, coming up with the next greatest thing that's going to make a huge impact. He's obsessed with the media, business, pop culture, and he works harder than anyone I've ever met. His heart beats for this company, the company he accidentally built, but it also beats for the people who work here. He's a true future thinker. He's not afraid to challenge people or ideas, and he's tenacious as hell when he has a vision. And these are all personality traits that you want in a CEO, right? But if I'm honest, there are elements of Duncan's personality that are completely discordant with such a role. His passion runs so deep, it can be hard for him to keep out of the weeds of the day-to-day running of the business. He's in the back end of the site tweaking and fiddling. He's listening to every podcast, reading every article, watching every second of video and scouring commercial contracts. He's keeping across member sign-ups. He's bloody checking where the coffee levels are at, for crying out loud. And all of that is great. It really is. But along with the high-end business stuff that's involved with being a CEO, it's a goddamn lot. And all of this at a time that's been really, really rocky for media and for someone who's kind of learning it all as he goes. And this is all before we take into account the fact he has a family who want and need him around. And obviously that's very important also. As you'll hear in our chat, Duncan, he ran out of puff. And he's also the first to admit perhaps he didn't do the job of CEO as well as someone else could. It's a really fascinating conversation that covers how the spin-off went from teleblog, as I've said, to a proper grown-up media entity, all under the leadership of someone who's learning as he goes and hiring a lot of people who are willing to do the same. And you'll see from our chat what I've known about Duncan for the 20-odd years I've known him, and what anyone who's ever dealt with Duncan knows. He's a very honest and real person who acknowledges when he's got things wrong, and his approach to this conversation is no different. So I know you're going to enjoy this one. Here's Duncan Greive on The Fold. Kia ora, Duncan.
Kia ora, Jane.
How are you?
I'm good. I feel quite bad for sort of Even though this was actually Samuel's idea, there's still some kind of weird guilt about making it all about me, even more so than usual.
The other option was to have you interview yourself, so I think this is probably, a good halfway point.
It's the least worst, yeah.
How does it feel being in the guest chair?
I like it. It's just got to have a chat with you, we don't get to do this enough.
For those who don't know, Duncan and I have a regular weekly podcast recapping reality television, but that's not what we're here to do today. We're here to talk about you and your big news that you are standing down as CEO of The Spinoff. And it came as a surprise to literally everybody, except a couple of people who were in the know. But we had a meeting just this side of the weekend, and you stood up, announced the news, and no one saw it coming.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought I was radiating weirdness for like months on end.
So maybe we'll go back to the beginning and then we'll talk about your decision.
Okay.
Okay? So tell me first of all how The Spinoff started.
I mean, I never intended to start it, is the weird thing. My friend Kerry Ann, who went on to be The Spinoff's GM for a while and still a very close friend of mine, was working at Lightbox, which was one of the first sort of streaming TV platforms in New Zealand. And they had this amazing catalogue of shows and not a lot of sort of news stories to tell. And I was working as a freelancer at the time and was just sort of chatting with her over like a rosé and just said, you should have some editorial content packaged around that, and that kind of would give it, put that into social channels and it would give your show some talkability. I thought it was literally just that, and then she took that to work, and their CEO liked the idea, workshopped it. I wrote like a little paper explaining why this was all like, oh, I'm a consultant now, it seems. This is very fancy. This is much better money than being a sort of magazine freelancer. And we got quite a long way, and I was intending just to sort of set it up and then let them run it, but then Sparks lawyers got involved quite near the end and just basically said that your contracts don't allow you to do this, Lightbox. You'd have these crazy approvals. And I remember this one. There are so many moments which I just seared into my brain where like my colossal naivety in starting this business was made clear. But of me just sort of trying to explain about fair use, all these concepts which A, don't exist in New Zealand and B, have no relevance to this. But the upshot of it was they said, why don't you go and start a media platform and we'll just sponsor it, basically outsource the idea. And I sort of thought, I guess that sort of fits in with what else I'm doing. I was writing Dan Carter's book at the time, was doing some like press releases and feature writing for Metro, and I was like, it's just another thing that I can put into my what I'm up to. And so that was where it all started. Like I say, it was an accident. It really was. I never intended to do it, and yet here we are, 8 years on.
But you weren't alone. You actually kicked things off with Alex Casey, a young writer. How did you find her?
So Alex has been really, really instrumental to The Spinoff, both in terms of defining its voice and giving it a sense of being a place for new writers, which is something I always wanted it to be. So I guess I'd been reading a lot of things like Grantland and Vulture and a lot of the places which were publishing really cool writing online, and I felt like there was a whole bunch of people who were also freelancing that I thought could write for The Spinoff, but I wanted there to be like this one new voice that would kind of feel like it was connected to the current internet moment or the then current internet moment. And so I just started reading, like, this is an era when a lot of people had little blogs and, a funny Twitter account could be sort of a good signal, and that's probably still the case, but it feels like a lot more sort of formalized now in terms of the channels. And I found this little blog called The Filminist, terrible name, on flex.co.nz, where Alex was writing these like amazingly funny analyses of
Lord of the Rings, or like Matt Damon movies, and she would just do like little speech bubble kind of meme things, and it was like this, but it was just such an incredible voice. And I hit her up on Twitter, asked her to follow me. It was all very tense. Met up with her for coffee and was like, do you want to
just try this thing out. And I think we were paying her like $500 a week or some terrible kind of thing. And she was like, yeah, I'll give that a go. I think she was like working in a movie theater at the time and basically never looked back. He was just like instantly brilliant, and instantly people who sort of were paying attention to kind of new and interesting writing were like, oh my gosh. And then, we started a podcast together, the three of us. She started power ranking The Bachelor, but those were our first smash hit pieces, and suddenly it felt like we had an identity, and so much of that was Alex's voice. If you like, we've had a lot of funny writers over the years. Our current editor, Mad Chapman, is a tremendously funny writer. Callum Henderson, Hayden Donnell, Toby Manhire, former editor of the site, also super funny. And I think the fact that it was a place that naturally allowed for that, because Alex had kind of set the table, meant that those people, A, were attracted to write for it, and B, felt like there was a breadth of available sort of real estate that you could operate in, and I think that that's been really crucial to sort of differentiating ourselves, because I don't think we consider ourselves a magazine, but everything looks the same online. It's one of the curses of the telephone as the delivery mechanism. So how do you show people that you're different from the Herald or Stuff or any other kind of New Zealand-made writing that you find? And I think having a sense of humour was really crucial to that.
So what is this magazine thing? Like how, for a layman looking on their phone at the Herald or Stuff or the Spinoff, it's words on a screen. So how is the Spinoff a magazine versus your regular media site?
I mean, because I came up through magazines, I used to edit a music magazine, always subscribed to, wrote for, read magazines as the primary media that I consumed. And, I think that they're a really special thing. That the total volume, what defines a magazine is greater length, greater detail. They work slower, they work more specialised in terms of their scope. They're less frequency. They just, often will have a sense of style. They care a lot more about design and imagery, all these things which I hope are manifest in the Spinoff, versus a newspaper much more fast-paced, much more sort of, the newspapers are amazing. I love them, consume them, subscribe to them.
It's just not what the Spinoff is.
It's not what the Spinoff is. And so we were trying to build something that had those qualities on a digital delivery platform. So you have to work with what you have around design. I also felt like actually podcasting, which we got into relatively early, was really crucial in that, in terms of having conversations, having a sense of humour, being able to go deep and digressive. That was so crucial to saying, here is our voice. Literally, here are our voices, which at the time, news sites were very much focused on text as their vehicle, and these are the signals you try and put up. But it remains quite difficult for people, I think, to understand their head, especially where they're sent to you through social media. A story kind of looks like a story, no matter how beautifully it's designed in some respects.
It's interesting hearing you talking about your plans and your vision for the site and podcasting and all these things and finding this gap in the market, when in reality what you did was accidentally start a little teleblog. So how soon was it that you started thinking bigger?
Like quite quickly. And again, that might have been a function of having Alex just sort of hold the day-to-day of the site. I realised I loved the business side. I've always been really interested in business writing, always read a lot of books about business, not kind of how-to type things, but generally the smartest guys in the room, like the story of Enron, or basically business disasters, but they're fascinating, and you get a sense of the stakes involved and the personalities involved and the risk tolerance you have to have. And people in my family have started businesses and so on, and so I guess I never imagined it for myself, but then as soon as I was doing it, I was like, oh, kind of into this.
This is not something everyone can do, Duncan. I mean, I know you mentioned you have the privilege of access to people in your family who have started businesses, so you've got access to some guidance and knowledge from them. But not everyone has the accidental nous that you have and the drive and the passion to make something like this grow and grow and grow. Also, when it's so, I don't know, initially at least, there's not a real plan involved, so you're involving it. It's not something you set out to do originally, is to create this multi-headed media beast.
No.
What is it about you?
I don't know. I don't think it's, I mean, look, I think that what's in me is in a few people. That's honestly one thing that I would love to kind of say to people is like, if you have even the faintest hint of an itch, it's not a crazy idea to kind of, if you can sort of engineer your life, and it feels like it's easier and easier now with people's tolerance for working from home and freelancing and kind of 3-day-a-week jobs, to like start a little thing and see how it feels, because I didn't know that about me, and then I found out that I liked it. And so, but to return to your question, basically partway through the first year, just started to think, well, this thing that we've done narrowly focused on television, that fundamental idea of trying to find a partner who will fund a different vertical, we'll give them some, it was we never wanted to do CPM-based advertising. That means the kind of display advertising that you see on other sites. We thought that our great skill was writing stories, so we should write stories about your brand, and then when we weren't doing that, we were writing whatever we wanted, and that was always the deal with our partners. But I thought that idea could work in other verticals, So I think on year one, we basically relaunched with a redesigned site, with politics run by Toby Manhire, parenting run by Emily Wrights, Steve Bronius was doing books. I think, Callum might have been doing sports. Like that, it was like a massive expansion in scope. And we did that on our first birthday, and I still don't really know how we did that, because most of those things had a sponsor or other. So I had to sell in all those things and recruit the writers and do that, and get the site redesigned and built, and do that all with a staff of 2 to do it on a single day. And I remember I think I worked like 24 hours straight, went home for about 40 minutes sleep, and then came back. Because we'd also rented this giant office in Britomart. Like, looking back, the naivety, that sort of beginner's mind of just rocking up to people and being like, hey, we think this is a cool idea. We were sending Word docs as pitches, like it was just like the stupid audacity, and yet it worked. And I think that big bang explosion of getting all these kind of name brand writers, and so grateful for those brands to support us, and just kind of saying, we're here and we're going to give this a real crack, that was a sort of a signal to the market, both in terms of commercial and for audiences, that this was more than what it initially presented as.
You guys were doing a lot of work for not a lot of money. Yeah,
that's the other thing. There were so many people who were willing to, use some small, whether it was, I think Toby had a few hours spare, and, basically there was this idea that you kind of, if you've got some smaller part of your week, that you can give it a crack. It's weird now as well, because those were like all incredible writers, and yet it didn't feel like there was much demand for incredible writing at the time. The magazines were all shrinking, and in frequency and in terms of budgets, and the newspapers hadn't yet sort of figured out that this like bomb of interesting writing was good for their stuff too.
It seems like a different time, because of course now
it's really hard and expensive to find good writing talent. Yeah,
and it's like that thing where you don't know what you want and need until you get it sometimes, right? And so having this incredible writing pop up on this little site, a lot of people were really hungry for it, and like, this is what we've been looking for, even though we didn't know we were looking for it. And you've managed to build this company by giving a lot of people chances who other people wouldn't necessarily hire in a particular role. And I use myself as an example, because we've been friends a long time. We've been doing a podcast together. Might make sense that I come in and run the podcast department, given my extensive history in podcasting. But actually, I remember coming to you and we were having a job interview, and you were like talking about CPM, and I was like, "What's CPM?" Like, that sticks so firmly in my mind the moment I was like, there's no way Duncan's going to put me in this role. I don't know what CPM means. But you explain it to me.
But I mean, that I think you're a classic example of how fortunate we've been, because I have hired a bunch of my friends. In fact, another one is Amber Easby, who's just taken over running the business. I had a bunch of talented friends. But also, I think because my whole experience of the business was not knowing anything. Like, I didn't know what a media agency was, and I didn't know that they were by far the biggest kind of gatekeepers to. I don't mean that in a bad way, that they just control where the money goes.
Sure.
A lot of brands don't necessarily know where they're going to spend, so they hire someone else to tell them where to spend it. And it took me years before I found that out, that really important, very basic fact. And so I'm like, if I can basically just roll into this thing colossally naive and it can work out, that I actually don't think that's a negative. I think if you've got someone who's really driven and dedicated and smart and cool, that you can figure this stuff out, and actually not knowing how things work means that you can innovate. And that's what I think we have done reasonably well as a group, is by being, I've always thought of us as outsiders for the most part, and often the people who've thrived here have been that's been what's driven the growth and the sort of singular identity of the spin-off is it's people who weren't already in the tent, who were just kind of keen to get in or make something new.
So you've started this business, which you didn't really even mean to necessarily start. Like, did you have a vision of what ultimately you wanted it to be, or were you just looking 6 months ahead at every point?
I think I knew I wanted it, what voice I wanted it to have, and what sort of demographic I wanted it to appeal to, or psychographic, actually. That we always talked about that over a demographic. A lot of media is targeted at a demographic because that's what an advertiser wants to reach. We, again, naively thought, well, if it's just a group of people who see the world a particular way, have a particular sense of humour or values, that that should be valuable to advertisers too. I still think that's true.
But how hard is it to do that? The advertising industry is a very traditional one. Demographics, as you say, is their kind of key point of focus. And here you are trying to sell a psychographic.
Yeah. But, there are people all throughout our society, all throughout different roles, who are also frustrated by the way things are. And that's how any kind of change happens. And so you press and you probe and you kind of follow a vibe and you read interviews with people, and whenever you sense that someone's trying to do something different, you're like, well, they might want to do something different with us. And that's really been the story. But they're like a relatively small group of people who've worked at a number of sort of big New Zealand organisations who've basically seen the spin-off, understood its function, and as they've moved to different jobs, have set up different kind of relationships with us, because they're not expensive by the standards of the overall industry. We remain, in terms of our total revenues, just a tiny proportion of what a Stuff or Herald would be. So you can do things which are really fun and interesting and different much more cheaply than you can at the big shops.
And also then you've got this relationship with your partners, your commercial partners, which is really different to anything they've seen before. So you're talking about partnering with people, whether it be an organisation that is willing to take a risk or a particular individual who's responsible for, making these decisions at an organisation, willing to take a risk on the spin-off. And that's cool. And, that's like an amazing thing, I think, that is unique to this business. And I think there's probably more, little companies doing the same thing. And I feel like, I don't want to blow smoke up your ass, but I feel like, you've paved the way a lot. I see the spin-off's influence, not just in writing, but in the way that business is done in media.
I mean, That's very kind, and I'm very sweating right now. But, I do feel like a kinship with like a generation of New Zealand businesses that have sort of set up probably with a similar kind of naivety, like if you're thinking, like we're just above arepa, the sort of brain drink. And
God, we love that stuff too.
I do. And, like the audacity of them to go against like V, which is owned by like Suntory or something, and we'll just like create a whole new segment of the market, or like Pix peanut butter, or I don't know why I'm picking these like food brands or food and drink brands, but there are just versions of them all over the country who I think that they're starting a business used to feel like super scary. Or certainly for me, it was like the business meant 3,000 people and a tower in downtown Auckland, or it meant like a lawnmower shop in the suburbs. And it didn't feel like there was anything in between. And that's been the sort of, I guess, a bit of the story of this decade is these kind of little shops starting up, but with some ambitions and having a crack at it. And I like that sort of feeling, it's largely unspoken. We cover them a bit, you meet them at times, but that just sense of, again, like you're just trying to do something new. And, I should say that like Stuff and the Herald and TVNZ and all the really big media companies have actually been tremendously kind to us, particularly given that we've been little shits about some of their products and people at various times, and I think that says that they know that while they perform a very important role, innovating and challenging is hard, and even when we're a pain in the ass, like sometimes that's kind of what's needed to push things forward. And there's been a bunch of other really interesting media startups out of this country as well, from Newsroom to Tangata to Shit You Should Care About, and I could go on and on. Like this is a very dynamic environment. We're hardly alone in that.
Mm. And you do have such a good relationship, it seems. Like you host a media podcast, not today, but in general, you host a media podcast and you manage to get all these people, and some of whom, you've challenged at points on the site, and they all come in. They're all quite happy to come in and have a yarn with Duncan Greive. How do you, I feel like I know how you do it because I am on the outside looking in, and I just think that you're a very passionate, you're very generous with your time and your knowledge, and I think you're a very real person, which goes a really, really long way. But in your mind, what is your relationship with these people?
If you're talking about like the people in leadership roles at the big organizations, I'm sure that they have been through various stages with me or with the spin-off, and at times really admired it, at times being like, what what the hell are you doing? And at times thought, and honestly, we have been quite mean-spirited at times. Like it's almost very inevitable when you're publishing at volume that you get things wrong, and we definitely have got things wrong multiple times. But hopefully people have seen that we are trying to do something, that we are passionate about media, that we want to create our own lane, discover new land rather than move in on someone else's. And I think people, in big or small organizations, at a fundamental level, if you take away the identities and if you just describe that, they are rooting for it, because, that's people like new things. The Fold is brought to you by O-Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O-Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has the lowdown on everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. Join some of the superstars of the investment and business world as they share advice from their time in the US so you can make your mahi count in this massive market. The Investment Fix podcast, brought to you by Invest New Zealand. Tune in today.
Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by The Spinoff. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit, so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
Speaking of new things, you have a background in journalism, right? And you were editor of the site, but also you have a passion for business. And so you would think something like The Spinoff, where it's a combination of both those things, would be a dream come true for you. It's like the perfect job, right? You've got the ability to write and to kind of mentor other writers and work with writers you admire, but also you get to dig your teeth into running a business. So what was it like going from, the thing is, you didn't really go from being an editor and journalist to running a business. They were all happening at the same time, right?
Yeah, for the first 4 years, it was sort of both those things. I mean, I had tremendous support, people like Kerry Ann, like Mark Keller, Simon Day, Ellie Rivera, over the years, in those kind of non-journalistic roles, absolutely crucial to our, growth and as a business. And that kind of, I think that allowed me to do those two things at once, to continue to write, which I don't think I could have kept doing it without continue to make media, because it kind of keeps you in the game. But also, they all had that sort of beginner's mind and willingness to learn as well. And, absolutely the same goes with you, Jane. Like, I think that there's just a group of us who've done this thing together and, aren't all necessarily here still, but I think there's a kinship that we all share about having done it. And I'll definitely have forgotten some really crucial names, but it is like, I think that was the most crucial part. But yeah, and then the other thing is like the nature of the job and every aspect of it has changed so much over the past 3 years post-COVID. It got a lot harder and grindier and more complicated in a myriad different ways.
When I first started at The Spinoff, your job title was founder and publisher, and at some point you sort of sheepishly agreed to take on the title of CEO. I don't really know what a CEO does. Tell me what a CEO does.
Honestly, I don't either. I've got no business the only qualifications I have are a BA, and I don't even know what history and sociology, and then a grad dip in journalism. So all I know of business I've learnt by doing or by watching / reading. So, but to me, the job was sort of leading the organisation and trying to kind of see things before they happen and move it in such a way that it was prepared to follow what it's been an incredibly destabilizing decade in media. The sucking of revenues to global digital search and social platforms is just unbelievable. That the power and strength of that, and so a lot of the time you're really just figuring out how to, and they have content, they have amazing content, and their content costs are zero. Your content costs are very high as a proportion of your revenue. So, on some level, if you really look at it, you're like, there's a reason why there are literally no analysts in New Zealand at any of the big sort of market-making financial firms that analyse media, because they don't think it's a real business, which is cool. But so, that's the sort of the backdrop to it. So a lot of the time it was, and about trying to figure out where things were going and where there was opportunity for us to kind of continue, sustain and grow. But
there's day-to-day involved as well, though, right?
Yeah.
It's all big strategy stuff that kind of you were doing even without the title of CEO. So what did being CEO bring into your day that was different?
I mean, and well, a lot of it I think is often like a sort of an external thing. So it is relationships with people who might prove to be partners or have kind of crucial roles to play in your business. Honestly, over the last 3 years, there's a lot of government relations kind of work. Talking to they're making very impactful legislation, making decisions about how they can sort of support or challenge the industry, and you have to be at that table, otherwise it just happens to you. But if I'm honest, Jane, I really mean this. I'm not just saying it. I don't think I was particularly good at the job of being CEO. I think once the company evolved beyond a certain scale and it was less, there were sort of managers and it was less about just kind of core personal relationships, I struggled to know what that next step was like around sort of setting up structures and making people feel like they were both accountable and supported and all those kind of things. That I think I can do that on an interpersonal level, but not in a structured way. And I think my continued inability to evolve into that kind of person, because I don't think I ever really did the CEO role in the way that a true CEO would naturally do it. That was first subliminally and then kind of explicitly weighing on me. And that's, ultimately why, when the idea of Amber taking over, just knowing the qualities that she had and the way that she operated, it was like, oh, this could work tremendously well. And even in my new role, the vast bulk of my time will be writing, podcasting and so on. But, I remain chair of our board, or I'm moving to become chair of our board. And, I think I'll still be able to do a lot of that kind of future-gazing type stuff that I have done before, but then it will be someone else's job to actually put that into a process that brings people with them rather than, has the work happen to them in ways that I think I probably didn't realize. I was just like, this is all really fun. And I think for some people it was like, yeah, this is pretty fun. This thing over here is really traumatic, and why are you doing that to me? And I feel terrible about that. I genuinely do.
Do you have any apprehension about relinquishing control? And I don't mean that in a control freak kind of a way. I mean that more in the sense of the spin-off is synonymous with Duncan Greive. Maybe not in the wider audience, but certainly I think in our local media industry, and indeed for everyone who works at the spin-off, is handing it over to someone else. And Amber is incredible, and I have absolutely zero doubt she's going to do an amazing job. But for someone like you who has always been involved in the weeds, you're in every single Slack channel, anyone in the company feels like that they can come and talk to you about anything. And there is going to be a shift away from that with you moving on from that role. And I guess you're going to be on staff and looking on and seeing the decisions that Amber makes. And I have no doubt she's not going to misstep. Oh, she probably will here and there, actually, to be fair.
That's impossible not to.
But when those things happen, like how is that going to be for you? This is like a lot of stuff you have to take on board before making a big decision like this.
I mean, I'm going to misstep too. I don't doubt that there will be moments, whether it's just through kind of muscle memory or, my own weird personality, I'll kind of keep doing old things when I should know to stay out of them. But I don't. There's a thing which I think you sometimes see with CEOs, like Bob Iger returning to run Disney is to me quite an interesting example of that. He ran it incredibly well for like 16 years. They had a really orderly succession process for Bob Chapek to take over, and then we're I think maybe 3 years in, and he comes back to run it again. And Bob Iger's incredible, like all time, Hall of Fame media executive. But I think there was some sense that he was just sort of watching what was happening and kind of couldn't keep himself away from the tools. I'm cautiously optimistic I'll be able to avoid that. I think because like I said, I don't think I was that great at it once at quite a particular scale. I think because Amber and I are very close, and she came into the role with eyes very wide open. I talked her through the whole time I was doing it. We weren't succession planning, but I don't think you could have run a much better process had you been. And so, and I just trust her a lot. I mean,
and we all do. Like, that's the thing is, I think the moment that you said you were stepping down, there was the shock of that, and then in the room immediately, like, first of all, I was like, oh God, please have appointed Amber. That was honestly, genuinely,
that's so
the first
cool.
thing in my mind. But
and
also,
the thundering applause when we announced was like quite overwhelming, and it was sustained.
It was really sustained,
really
like
kept
in a way
going.
that I'm sure I've never witnessed at the Spinoff before.
No,
which must have made you feel extremely reassured in the decision you'd made.
That sustaining, that little moment, I'll never forget, because I was like, oh, this is going to be fine.
Yeah. But it was, was there anyone else you were considering for the role? Because I think in terms of staff, it's really scary to have someone like you step down, and handing over to Amber, in my mind, is the most logical thing. We know her, we love her, we know how freaking amazing she is at what she does. We know she operates differently to you, but that's not a bad thing. No offence.
No, it's a really good thing. I mean, I'm very genuinely mean. I wasn't that good at large aspects of the job.
But, had someone else new been stepping in, the Spinoff is such a unique place to try and understand.
I mean, when I talked to, I'd sort of idly contemplated aspects of it, but really not that deeply. But at various times I talked to various people about, how I would manage it, and they would sort of say, maybe you just need a really professional kind of media CEO who's done a bunch of things to come in, and that might well have worked. But I think because, as you say, it's such a specific culture, it's got so many people who've worked together for quite a long time and figured things out on their own and done things a bit differently, that to have someone come in from the outside, it would just take them a very long time to understand that. And if they didn't, even if they thought they knew what they were getting themselves into, there might be just little idiosyncrasies that were quite difficult to manage. And I think that to pick one random example, our commercial content operation is so different to the way it's run at other places, where you tend to just supply the copy and then it goes up on the site. Basically, the client kind of can create it and often has complete control. We try and do it really differently. Matt McCauley, who's taken over from Simon Day to run that, has had a tremendous role in shaping that. And I think that it'd be very easy to go, oh, there's just efficiencies here, and that's where I think to have someone who sort of knows why this strange building has been constructed in the way that it has is very important and helpful to it. There's and the business is strewn with that kind of thing, whether it's the scale of the art and design department with Tina and Toby, or the podcasting or technology, and all the different pieces are there for a reason. That doesn't mean that they the whole business won't evolve, but it's there for a reason, and I think Amber just really gets that.
And we really are just like a ragtag bunch of misfits, aren't we?
I've used that stupid phrase so many times.
It's so true, though. Look, Duncan, when you delivered your speech just a week ago, last Monday, it was very Jacinda-esque. There is a personal element to this as well. I mean, for a start, it takes a lot to admit that maybe you're not the very best person for the job. Many people wouldn't. They might realise it but not say it out loud and make up some other excuse. But as a friend and a colleague for a long time, you could see there's stuff weighing heavily on you, and there was an exhaustion about you, and you got up and you delivered the "I got no more gas in the tank" speech.
Yeah.
Are you pissed she got there first?
No. I wrote this in a piece about it on the site, and that I actually think it's really helpful to have like the literal Prime Minister just stand up and say, I'm basically fucked, mate.
It was very generous of her to do that.
It was. It just created space
for her to walk so you could run, you know?
And even on the day that I announced my resignation, there were like 2 more resignations of people I sort of know about. And I was like, man, this could be a real movement coming in. And, you know, there were other people, there were obviously just like a massive number of texts from people in the media or people I've dealt with over the years in the aftermath, and so many of them were like, I'm working on that myself, you know? And some of that's just like at any given time, that's always true. But I do think that doing whatever hard job you were doing through COVID and then having that go away and it still be hard, I think there's some kind of weird, it's not a hollowness, but it's like quite hard. And then you're going to, what we're told is going to be a recession. It's quite hard to pick yourself up off the canvas and just keep running into, into the fire. It's just a really mixed metaphor there. But, and it's just, I just feel really, really grateful to Amber for being not just willing, but really excited to take on the job, and to everyone else for just seeing that it was time and supporting her with that. So, yeah, just a lucky boy. I've really liked this, Jane. Thanks so much. It hasn't felt as weird as I thought it would, and or also self-indulgent. But yeah, really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
It's very hard for me to be objective because obviously I adore you and I love what you've done with this. And I feel safe saying this. Like, who feels safe saying this to someone who is no longer their boss, but certainly was until very recently? Like, this silly little business that you've made, like, to be able to call it a silly little business and that be somehow a compliment, you know, we treasure you. You've done an incredible job, and we are going to miss your craziness at the helm. But so pleased that you are still such an integral part of the spin-off, because we'd be all lost at sea without you, Dunk.
Oh, Jane, that's way too much.
Do you want to have a little last-minute members message? In the very least.
Yeah, okay. I mean,
that's a huge part, and we never even got to it.
It is. They actually like both changed and saved the business. When COVID hit, the whole thing just went from being entirely funded by commercial revenue to being probably over half coming from our members. And I think the thing about members, again, that could be one of my mistakes that I've made, is that we just said it was basically on a voluntary basis. You pay what you can. You can donate as a one-off or on an ongoing basis, but which is not how a business could be run. Businesses need to be able to raise prices because wages go up all the time, and if people stop donating, they shouldn't get the product. But we're all like, well, once the product's made, the more people who see it, the better. So the whole fundamental idea of members, that you pay to support a thing that you love so that as many people as possible can see it, is really quite radical in the context of the way that businesses typically operate. And it was really validating through the early stages of COVID to see that come up. If I'm honest, it is a bit scary lately, because a lot of people, because they're going through their own cost of living crisis, have either shrunk or cancelled their memberships, and we still have a bunch of people supporting us. But I think for people who are listening who get something out of what the spin-off is, whether it's the podcast network, whether it's the writing, whether it's our videos, or they love the side eye, whatever it is, it is a hard thing to make happen. There's 30 people here, and there's like literally thousands of freelancers we've worked with over the years. So if you want to support us and can afford to in these wild times, go to members.thespinoff.co.nz and show us.
Imagine a world without a spin-off, and maybe that will help encourage you to donate if you can, because I think in these wild times is when we need it most, right? Like, whether it be for like proper in-depth analysis or just a light funny to help get you through, I think that you want to be informed when it's an election year. There's, states of emergencies, the cost of living crisis, the housing market's doing God knows what.
Quite floody.
Yeah, there's a lot of information to take board, and I mean, I think we're the best people to provide that information. Thank you, Duncan.
I don't know if that's true, but we're certainly some people to provide that information. Thank you so much.
For a certain psychographic, of course.
That's right, for a certain psychographic. And if you're still here, then you are that psychographic.
Thank you so much, Duncan, for joining me on your podcast. It's been a real treat.
Thank you. Thank you, Samuel, for recording.
The Fold is brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network. It's hosted by Duncan Greive, with production by Tiahe Butler and Samuel Robinson. Series production is by Jane Yee.
That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
K-pop to me means more than just listening to music. It's learning to be myself.
The Spinoff's new documentary, K-Pollies, follows 3 Pacific youth obsessed with K-pop. In a one-off documentary, see what they've found in Korean pop culture and how they bridge it with their own.
When you start dressing, looking different, everyone side-eyes you. But in K-pop, they're just like, no, celebrate yourself.
Watch K-Pollies today at thespinoff.co.nz/videos. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. The Spinoff Podcast Network.